All right, let's dive into endpoint detection and response, EDR. But before you think, oh no, more tech jargon, just wait. This deep dive, I promise it's going to be worth it.
Yeah, you've got all these devices these days connected to the internet, right? Your phone, laptop, maybe even your smart fridge, who knows?
Hmm.
But each one is a potential way in for attackers.
Oh, okay. So like a bunch of unlocked doors in your digital house.
Yeah,
Nuts.
exactly. And that's where EDR comes in. It's like a super smart security system. Not only locks those doors, but watches everything going on inside, looking for any sign of trouble.
So it's not just about blocking things, it's more about understanding what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. EDR is all about detecting, investigating, and then responding to threats before they can do any real damage.
Okay, starting to get why this is important, but let's break it down a little. What are some of the things EDR does that makes it different from just, basic antivirus software?
Well, EDR doesn't just look at a database of known viruses. It uses way more advanced techniques, things like machine learning, to look at file behavior and spot anything unusual. So, for example, if an app suddenly tries to access files it shouldn't need, EDR is going to flag that as suspicious.
Interesting. So it's like having a detective that can predict a crime before it happens, based on unusual patterns or something.
Exactly. And then there's sandboxing, too, another powerful tool EDR can use. EDR can isolate suspicious files in a virtual environment, sort of like a digital quarantine, you could say, to analyze them without risking any harm to your system.
Oh, that's smart. So what kind of analysis happens in the sandbox then?
Well, EDR might do static code analysis, which basically looks at the code itself for red flags, or it can do dynamic behavior analysis, where it observes how the file acts when it runs. So like a full interrogation for any potentially shady software.
Okay, so EDR is always working in the background, watching for anything suspicious. But what happens when it actually finds a threat? How does it respond then?
Well, EDR can take a bunch of different actions. It all depends on the threat. So, for example, it can automatically isolate an infected device from the network. That way it stops the threat from spreading. Or it can terminate a malicious process, quarantine suspicious files, even roll back the system to a previous state.
Wow. Okay. So, like having a whole team of security professionals monitoring your devices 24/7, and they just jump into action as soon as something goes wrong, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is. And the beauty of it is it's all automatic. You don't have to do a thing. EDR takes care of all the cybersecurity stuff so you can focus on other things.
This is really fascinating. But to be honest, sometimes you hear about these big cyber attacks, and you think, well, that only happens to big companies or governments. Is EDR really something that everyday people should be worried about?
That's a pretty common misconception. The truth is, cyber criminals are targeting everyone these days. Think about all the personal data you have stored on your devices. Bank details, credit card numbers, social security number, all that. It's a gold mine for attackers.
Okay, yeah. Starting to make me a little nervous now. So you're saying EDR isn't just for big companies, it's for anyone who uses the internet, really?
Absolutely. And
Hmm.
in fact, with so many people working remotely and all the devices we connect to the internet these days, you could argue individuals are actually more vulnerable now than ever before.
So it's like having that same level of security as big corporations,
Yeah.
but scaled down for like everyday use.
Yeah, exactly. And the good news is there are EDR solutions now specifically made for people at home and small businesses. These solutions have all the core functionalities as the bigger ones, but they're much simpler to use and way more affordable.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Sounds like EDR is becoming pretty essential for anyone who wants to protect themselves online. You mentioned earlier that EDR is especially good at dealing with advanced persistent threats, or APTs. What exactly are those, and why are they so dangerous?
APTs are a different beast altogether compared to your average virus or malware. These are really sophisticated attacks, often done by nation-states or organized crime groups. They're designed to stay hidden for long periods of time, slowly stealing sensitive data without being detected.
Okay, this is starting to sound like a spy thriller. How can EDR even protect against something that's designed to be invisible?
Well, remember how we talked about EDR's ability to analyze behavior and spot anomalies? Even though APTs are stealthy, they still leave clues. For example, they might communicate with a command and control server, which is located in another country, or they might try to access sensitive files that are outside their usual scope.
So EDR can detect those little clues that other security tools would miss.
Exactly. Think of it this way. A traditional antivirus is like a guard dog. It barks at anything suspicious. EDR is more like a detective. It analyzes the scene, looks for patterns, and connects the dots to find the real threat.
That's a great analogy. So EDR is like having Sherlock Holmes on your side, constantly working to protect you from those hidden dangers in the digital world.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And as we go further into the world of EDR in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore even more of its capabilities and how they can help you stay ahead of the bad guys.
Okay, I'm hooked. I can't wait to learn more. But for now, let's take a minute to absorb all this and come back ready to unpack even more EDR in just a bit. Welcome back, everyone. So now that we've talked about what EDR is and why it's so important, let's really dig into how it stacks up against those APTs. You mentioned they can be pretty hard to catch. So how does EDR even have a chance?
You're right, they are designed to be super sneaky. But remember, even the best spies leave some kind of trail. And that's where EDR's continuous monitoring comes in. It's constantly collecting data from your endpoints, not just about files, but network connections, user behavior, even system-level events, all of it.
Okay, so it's gathering a ton of information, but how does it actually make sense of all that data and spot those, like subtle APT clues?
Think of it like, if you were a detective investigating a crime scene, you're not just looking for the obvious stuff, like a weapon or fingerprints, right? You're also paying attention to all the little details, like a misplaced object or a scuff mark on the floor. Those tiny details can often give you the biggest clues.
Right, connecting the dots. But in this case, the dots are digital footprints scattered across a huge network. So how does EDR piece it all together?
That's where things get really interesting. EDR uses advanced analytics and machine learning algorithms to sift through all that data and find patterns. Patterns that might show an APT is at work. For example, it might see that a user account suddenly starts accessing files it's never touched before, or it might detect weird network traffic patterns, like data being sent to a server in another country.
So EDR can spot those tiny little deviations from the norm that a human might not even notice.
Exactly. And because EDR is always learning and adapting, it can even detect threats that have never been seen before. It's not just using a static database of known bad guys. It's constantly evolving its detection capabilities based on the latest threat intelligence.
Okay, this is starting to sound a bit like science fiction, but in a good way. So let's say EDR does detect a potential APT. What happens then? Does it just send me an alert and say, good luck with that?
No, definitely not. Remember, EDR is all about response, not just detection. So once it's found a threat, it can take a variety of actions to neutralize it, like isolating the infected device from the network, or terminating malicious processes. It can even roll back the system to a point before the attack even happened.
Wow, so it's like having an automated incident response team that just jumps into action whenever a threat is detected.
It is. And because EDR works at the endpoint level, it can respond to threats way faster than those traditional security solutions, which often rely on a central server to analyze data and send commands.
And that speed must be so important, especially when you're dealing with something like an APT. That could be stealing data for weeks or months without you knowing.
Absolutely. Early detection and fast response are key to minimizing the damage. The longer an attacker goes unnoticed, the more sensitive data they can get their hands on.
This has been a really insightful look at how EDR deals with those sneaky APTs. But with all this talk about advanced threats and fancy technology, isn't EDR just for big companies, the ones with huge IT departments and tons of money?
That used to be true, but things are changing fast. Cyber threats are getting more sophisticated, and they're targeting everyone. So individuals and small businesses need the same level of protection now.
So it's like having access to that same high-level security that only the big players used to have.
Exactly. And luckily, there are EDR solutions now designed specifically for home users and small businesses. They have the same core features as the enterprise versions, but they're much simpler to use and more affordable.
That's great news. It means everyone can get that extra layer of protection. But with so many EDR solutions out there, how do you even know which one to choose?
Yeah, it can definitely be a little overwhelming. But there are a few key things to consider. First, think about your own specific needs and what threats you face. What kind of devices do you need to protect? What data are you storing? Are you worried about specific types of attacks, like ransomware or phishing scams?
So it's kind of like shopping for a car. You wouldn't buy a sports car if you need to haul a lot of stuff.
Exactly. You need to find an EDR solution that fits your needs. Another important thing to think about is ease of use. Some EDR solutions are made for IT professionals, while others are much easier to use for people who aren't so tech-savvy. You want to choose one that you're comfortable using and managing.
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to get stuck with a complicated system you don't understand. So ease of use, specific needs, anything else.
Well, of course, cost is always a factor. EDR solutions can range in price from a few bucks a month to hundreds or even thousands of dollars per year. It all depends on the features and how much protection you need. So you need to balance your budget with your security needs.
Okay, ease of use, specific needs, and cost. Those are all good things to think about when considering EDR. But now that we've covered how EDR deals with APTs and how to choose the right solution, I'm curious about some real-world examples of how EDR has helped stop attacks.
Yeah, I thought you might ask. In the last part of our deep dive, we'll look at some fascinating case studies that show the power of EDR in action. We'll see how EDR has been used to detect and stop everything, from ransomware attacks to nation-state espionage campaigns.
Okay, we're back, ready to finish up our deep dive into EDR. We've talked about how it works, how to choose the right one, all that. But I'm really interested in hearing about those real-world examples you mentioned, the ones that show EDR in action actually stopping these cyber attacks.
Yeah, I figured you would be. Let's start with a case involving a financial institution. Those are prime targets for cyber criminals. They were hit with a pretty sophisticated phishing campaign designed to steal employee logins.
Oh, so those emails that try to trick you into giving up your password? Yeah, I see those all the time in my spam folder.
Exactly. And unfortunately, one employee did fall victim. Click on a bad link. And that's all it took for the attackers to get into their network. They installed malware that was designed to steal sensitive financial data.
Oh, wow. That's like a worst-case scenario. But this is where EDR comes in, right?
Right. Luckily, they had an EDR solution in place. It detected the malware's behavior, even though it was a brand new type,
Yeah.
something that traditional antivirus wouldn't have recognized. The EDR system immediately isolated the infected computer, so the malware couldn't spread any further.
So it was like a digital fire extinguisher, containing the damage before it could get out of control.
Perfect analogy. But it did more than just contain the threat. It also gave them detailed information about the attack, like where the malware came from, what it was targeting, the specific data it was after. This information was super helpful for their security team. They were able to quickly fix any vulnerabilities and improve their defenses so they could prevent similar attacks from happening again.
That's amazing. So EDR stopped the bleeding, but also helped them figure out how to avoid getting hurt again.
Exactly. And that's one of the best things about EDR. It's not just reactive, it's proactive too. It helps organizations improve their overall security.
Okay, that's a really impressive story. But are there examples of EDR stopping those really advanced threats, like those APTs we were talking about before, the ones that are designed to stay hidden for a long time?
Definitely. Let me tell you about a manufacturing company. They were targeted by a nation-state hacking group. They suspected the attackers were after their intellectual property. These hackers were patient, very stealthy. They used custom-made malware that was basically invisible to normal security tools.
So they were like digital ninjas or something, sneaking in and stealing secrets without a trace.
Exactly. And for a while, they were successful. They got into the company's network and started slowly stealing sensitive data. But eventually, their luck ran out.
EDR caught them.
Yep. The EDR system noticed something unusual in their network traffic. There were these small, irregular data transfers going to a server in another country, a classic sign of an APT. So the EDR system flagged this as suspicious and alerted the security team.
So it was like a tiny little blip on the radar that EDR was able to pick up, even though the attackers were trying so hard to stay hidden.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And that early detection was key. The company was able to stop the attack, kick the hackers out of their network, and prevent any more data from being stolen. If they didn't have EDR, they might never have even known they were under attack until it was way too late.
Wow, these stories are really incredible. I'm starting to see why EDR is such a big deal in cybersecurity. It's like having an extra layer of protection that can really make all the difference.
I completely agree. And these are just a couple of examples. There are tons of stories out there about EDR helping organizations, from small businesses all the way up to government agencies, protecting themselves from all kinds of cyber threats.
This has been such an insightful deep dive into EDR. We've covered everything from the basics to real-world examples. I feel like I have a much better understanding of how important EDR is, especially with how much we rely on technology these days.
It's been great talking with you about this. Remember, the more you know about the threats out there and how to protect yourself, the better off you'll be.
Absolutely. A huge thank you to our expert for taking us on this EDR journey. And to our listeners, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there in the digital world.
Until next time.